I never imagined that a single afternoon would shatter the life I had spent decades building. But sometimes, the truth doesn't knock politely. It crashes through your world like a wrecking ball, leaving nothing but ruins in its wake. I'm sharing this story with you today because silence protects the wrong people. And I've been silent long enough, so please, stay with me until the very end. And tell me which city you're calling home right now. I want to know how far a woman's voice of truth can travel across this world. My name is Elena Hartfield, and for 28 years, I wore the title of devoted wife like a badge of honor. I married Richard when I was barely 23, fresh out of college with dreams bigger than my tiny apartment and a heart that believed love could conquer anything. Richard was 10 years older, already climbing the corporate ladder with the kind of confidence that made everyone in the room turn and listen. He promised me stability, partnership, a life where we'd grow old together on a porch somewhere, holding hands and watching sunsets. I believed every word. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The way he always needed to be in control. The way he'd charm everyone around him, but save his coldest moments for me when no one was watching. The way he made decisions about our life without really consulting me, just informing me with that smile that made disagreement feel like betrayal. But I was young and in love, and I mistook his dominance for strength, his manipulation for leadership. We built what looked like a perfect life from the outside. A beautiful home in Riverside Heights with a garden I tended every weekend. The house itself was a colonial-style beauty with white columns and black shutters, the kind of place that appeared in home magazines. I spent years making it perfect, choosing curtains, arranging furniture, planting roses that bloomed every spring in shades of pink and red. Dinner parties where friends complimented my cooking and envied our seemingly unshakable bond. Vacations to places I'd only dreamed of as a girl. Paris, Rome, the Greek islands where the water was so blue it hurt to look at. And then came our son, Marcus, the center of our universe. The proof that everything we'd worked for had meaning. I remember the day he was born like it was yesterday. Richard held him with such tenderness, tears streaming down his face, and I thought, this is it. This is what love looks like. Our family is complete. Marcus grew up to be everything a mother could hope for. Kind, thoughtful, ambitious in the quietest way. He didn't have his father's aggressive confidence, thank God. Instead, he had this gentle strength, this quiet integrity that made people trust him instinctively. He studied architecture in college, spent hours drawing buildings that existed only in his imagination, structures that balanced beauty with function. I used to watch him work at our kitchen table, his head bent over his sketches, and feel such overwhelming love I thought my heart would burst. When he met Vanessa during his first year working at an architecture firm, I thought my happiness was complete. She was stunning, yes, tall and willowy with this cascade of dark hair and eyes that seemed to change color depending on what she wore. But more than that, she seemed genuine. She'd sit with me in the kitchen, asking about my recipes, laughing at my stories, calling me mom within months of meeting Marcus. She'd bring me flowers for no reason, text me funny things she'd seen during her day, ask my advice about everything from what to wear to job interviews to how to handle difficult coworkers. I loved her. God help me, I truly loved her like the daughter I'd never had. When they got engaged, I cried happy tears. I helped her choose her wedding dress, a gorgeous ivory gown with lace sleeves that made her look like something out of a fairy tale. I threw her a bridal shower, organized the rehearsal dinner, made sure every detail of their wedding day was perfect. And on that beautiful Saturday in June, when Marcus and Vanessa exchanged vows in the garden of an estate overlooking the river, I stood there thinking, this is what it's all about. This is why we build families, why we sacrifice, why we love. Richard stood beside me, his hand in mine, and whispered, "We did good, Elena. Look at our boy." I squeezed his hand and whispered back, "We did." If I had known then what I know now, I would have burned that wedding to the ground. The first year of their marriage was blissful, at least from where I stood. Marcus and Vanessa bought a townhouse in Willowbrook, a charming neighborhood full of young families and tree-lined streets. They'd have us over for dinner, and I'd watch them move around their kitchen together with that easy intimacy of newlyweds, finishing each other's sentences, exchanging private smiles. Vanessa would rest her hand on Marcus's shoulder as she passed, and he'd catch it and kiss her fingers, and I'd think, they're going to be okay. They're going to make it. Richard seemed happy too, in his distant way. He'd mellowed slightly with age, or so I thought. He still worked long hours, still had his Thursday afternoon client meetings and Tuesday evening networking dinners, but he came home to me. He still kissed me goodnight, still held my hand during movies, still told me he loved me, even if the words had started to sound automatic, rehearsed. I told myself, that's just what happened in long marriages. The passion fades, but the partnership remains. The butterflies die, but the foundation holds. I believed in that foundation with everything I had. I was such a fool. The years passed in a comfortable rhythm. Marcus and Vanessa's second anniversary. Their third. Family holidays where we'd all gather at my house. Thanksgiving with a turkey I'd brine for days. Christmas with presents stacked under a tree that brushed the ceiling. Vanessa would help me in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and sharing gossip about her coworkers, while Richard and Marcus watched football in the living room, their voices rising and falling with the game. Normal. Everything was so beautifully, devastatingly normal. I started noticing small things around their third anniversary, things that didn't quite make sense but weren't alarming enough to pursue. The way Vanessa would sometimes check her phone during dinner and smile secretively before putting it away. The way she'd mention needing to run errands on Thursday afternoons and come back with no shopping bags. The way Marcus would complain sometimes that she seemed distracted, distant, but when I'd ask if everything was okay, he'd say, yeah, just stress from work. And Richard had become almost attentive again around that time, bringing me flowers randomly, suggesting we take a weekend trip together, complimenting my cooking more than usual. I thought we were experiencing some kind of second honeymoon phase, that rekindling of affection that sometimes happens in long marriages when you least expect it. I didn't know I was being managed, placated, kept sweet and unsuspecting, while he destroyed our family from the inside out. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September when my carefully constructed world began to crack. I remember the date because it was Marcus and Vanessa's 4th anniversary. 4 years of marriage that I'd celebrated like they were my own milestones. I'd spent the morning baking Vanessa's favorite lemon lavender cake, the recipe I'd perfected over countless attempts, just to see her smile. The cake was finicky. The lemon had to be fresh squeezed, the lavender steeped in the cream at just the right temperature, the layers assembled while still slightly warm so the frosting would set properly. I'd made this cake a dozen times, tweaking it each time until Vanessa had declared it absolutely perfect. Better than anything from a bakery, she'd said, licking frosting off her fork. You should sell these, Mom. Mom, she'd called me Mom, and I'd glowed with pride. The sun was warm but not too hot that September afternoon, and the breeze carried the scent of jasmine from my garden as I loaded the cake into my car. I'd placed it carefully in a bakery box I'd bought special, white with a clear window, so she could see it without opening it. I imagined her face when I showed up, surprise, delight, maybe tears because she was sentimental like that. I didn't call ahead. I never did with Vanessa. We had that kind of relationship. Or so I thought, the kind where you could just drop by with baked goods and conversation. The kind where doors were always open and visits were always welcome. Her townhouse was only 15 minutes away, nestled in Willowbrook, where every house looked like it belonged on a postcard. White picket fences, flower boxes in the windows, children's bikes lying in yards. The kind of neighborhood where people waved to each other and knew their neighbors' names. Safe, wholesome, the perfect place to start a family. As I turned onto Cedar Lane, I felt nothing but contentment. Maybe I'd stay for tea. Maybe we'd talk about the anniversary dinner Marcus had planned. He'd been secretive about it, wanting to surprise her. Maybe she'd let me help her pick out something to wear. Or we'd flip through those wedding photos she kept in an album on the coffee table, laughing at hairstyles and remembering that perfect day. But then I saw it. Richard's black Mercedes, parked in Vanessa's driveway like it had every right to be there. My foot slipped off the gas pedal. The car rolled forward slowly, as if time itself had thickened into something I had to push through. For a moment, my brain simply couldn't process what I was seeing. That couldn't be Richard's car. He was at the office. He'd kissed me goodbye that morning, told me he had back-to-back meetings all afternoon, might even be late getting home. But there was no mistaking that car. The small dent in the rear bumper from when he'd backed into a pole last year. The parking permit from his office building hanging from the rearview mirror. The license plate that read RJH 2847. Numbers I'd memorized from years of following him in my own car to various events. I told myself there was an explanation. Richard must have stopped by to drop something off. Maybe he was helping Marcus with a surprise for the anniversary. Maybe Marcus had asked him to check on something in the house while he was at work. Maybe. But my hands were already shaking as I pulled over 2 houses down, parking beneath an old oak tree that cast shadows across my windshield. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought I might be sick. Something primal, something ancient and knowing was screaming inside me that I didn't want to see what came next. Every instinct I had told me to drive away, to go home, to pretend I'd never seen that car, to protect the life I'd built from whatever truth was waiting in that house. I should have driven away. God, how I wish I had driven away. Instead, I stepped out of my car, leading the cake on the passenger seat, and walked toward Vanessa's house on legs that didn't feel like my own. The neighborhood was silent except for the distant sound of a lawnmower and the rhythmic chirping of cicadas. Each step felt like walking through water, heavy and slow and inevitable. The front curtains were drawn, but I knew Vanessa often left her kitchen window cracked open when she cooked. She liked the fresh air, she told me once, and the way the breeze would carry cooking smells outside instead of letting them linger in the house. I moved around the side of the house, my breath shallow, my vision narrowing to a single point of focus. My shoes crunched on the gravel of her side yard. I passed her herb garden, the one I'd helped her plant last spring, with basil and rosemary and thyme all growing in a neat row. The window was indeed open, just a few inches, but enough. And then I heard them. Vanessa's voice first, light and teasing in a way that made my stomach drop. That tone, I knew that tone. It was intimate, flirtatious, the voice you used with someone you were comfortable with, someone you loved. Vanessa's voice first, light and teasing in a way that made my stomach drop. That tone, I knew that tone. It was intimate, voice and teasing in a way that made my stomach drop. That tone, I knew that tone. It was intimate, flirtatious, the voice you use with someone you were comfortable with. Spoken with such casual familiarity, felt like a physical blow. My knees went weak. I pressed my hand against the side of the house to keep from falling. Amen. Then Richard's laugh, deep, relaxed, intimate. The laugh he used to save for me, back when we were young and everything was new, and he looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. Amen. Elena thinks I'm at the office reviewing contracts. She never questions it. She trusts me completely. The words hung in the air like poison gas, seeping into my lungs, choking me. She trusts me completely. Said with such casual certainty, such complete confidence that his faithful wife would never doubt, never question, never know. Must be nice, Vanessa said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Having someone so devoted, so blind. Blind. The word cut through me like a knife. Was that how they saw me? As some pathetic blind fool who couldn't see what was happening right under her nose? Don't, Richard replied, his tone shifting to something softer, something that sounded almost like affection. She's not blind. She's just good. Too good. She'd never imagined this in a million years. He was right about that. Standing there beneath that window, my world crumbling around me, I realized I truly never had imagined this. Not once in 28 years of marriage had I suspected Richard of cheating, and certainly never ever with Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, my son's wife, the woman I'd welcomed into our family with open arms, the woman I'd loved. I pressed my hand against the side of the house to keep from falling, the rough texture of the siding biting into my palm, grounding me in a reality I desperately wanted to deny. My other hand went to my mouth, pressing hard, holding in the scream that was building in my throat. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. But Vanessa's next words left no room for doubt, no space for denial, no hope that I'd misunderstood. "Sometimes I feel guilty," she said quietly, and for a moment I thought maybe there was some humanity left in her. But then she continued, "Marcus is a good man. He doesn't deserve this." "I know," Richard said, and there was a pause that stretched like eternity. I imagined him moving closer to her, touching her the way he used to touch me, the way a husband touches his wife. "But what we have, I can't walk away from it. I won't. Won't. Not can't. Won't." This wasn't some momentary weakness, some mistake made in a moment of poor judgment. This was a choice, a deliberate, ongoing choice to betray me, to betray Marcus, to destroy our family for their own selfish pleasure. The world tilted. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. Not yet, not here where they might hear me. I stumbled backward, away from the window, away from the voices that were carving out pieces of my heart with every syllable. My shoe caught on a garden stone, and I nearly fell, catching myself against a decorative trellis that rattled loudly enough to make me freeze. Inside, the voices stopped. "Did you hear that?" Vanessa whispered, her voice suddenly sharp with fear. I didn't wait to hear more. I ran, actually ran back to my car, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my hands fumbling with the door handle. I threw myself into the driver's seat and turned the key with shaking fingers that could barely grip it. The engine roared to life. Too loud, too obvious, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away, to put distance between myself and the nightmare unfolding in that perfect little townhouse. I drove without seeing, turning randomly at intersections, my body operating on autopilot, while my mind tried to process what I'd just heard. The voices played over and over in my head, like a recording I couldn't shut off. She trusts me completely. So blind. Marcus is a good man. He doesn't deserve this. I won't walk away. Eventually, I found myself in an empty parking lot near the lake where Richard and I used to bring Marcus when he was small. We'd had picnics here, thrown bread to the ducks, pushed Marcus on the swings in the playground that was now rusty and unused. Happy memories, or what I'd thought were happy memories. Now I wondered if any of it had been real. I parked facing the water and finally let myself fall apart. The sobs came from somewhere deep and primal, a place I didn't know existed inside me. They shook my entire body, violent and uncontrollable, ripping through me like a storm. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were so swollen I could barely see. I cried until there was nothing left, until I was empty and hollow and numb. The cake sat beside me in its white box, perfect and untouched, a monument to my own stupidity. I'd spent hours making it, measuring and mixing and baking, all for a woman who was sleeping with my husband, all for an anniversary that was being celebrated with my husband's betrayal. I picked up the box and threw it out the car window. It landed in the grass beside the parking lot, the box splitting open, the carefully crafted layers sliding apart, frosting smearing across white cardboard. Ruined, just like everything else. How long had this been going on? The questions circled in my mind like a vulture. Thursday afternoons, How many Thursday afternoons? Richard had been claiming those client meetings for years. And Vanessa? Had it started before she married Marcus? During their engagement? On their wedding day? Had she already been sleeping with his father? The thought made me retch. I opened the car door and vomited into the parking lot, my body rejecting the reality it had been forced to accept. When the heaving stopped, I sat there with my head in my hands, trying to breathe, trying to think, but all I could see was Marcus's face. My beautiful, trusting son who had no idea his wife and his father were destroying everything behind his back. What would this do to him? How would he survive this kind of betrayal? The betrayal was double-edged. My husband and my daughter-in-law, the two people I'd welcomed into my heart without reservation. They hadn't just betrayed me and Marcus individually. They'd betrayed us as a family, as a unit, as everything we'd built together. And my son, my beautiful, unsuspecting son who had no idea his wife and his father were destroying everything behind his back. The sun began to set, painting the lake in shades of orange and pink that seemed obscene in their beauty. How dare the world be beautiful when mine was ending? I sat there until the colors faded to gray, until the streetlights flickered on, until I felt numb enough to drive home. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, the house looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. The same hanging plants on the porch, their flowers bright and cheerful. The same welcome mat Richard had given me for my birthday 3 years ago, with "Home Sweet Home" printed across it in cheerful letters. The same white rocking chairs we'd bought together, planning for the day we'd sit in them as grandparents, watching our grandchildren play in the yard. But everything was different now. The house that had been my sanctuary now felt like a prison. I was different now. The woman who had left this house with a cake and a smile no longer existed. In her place was someone I didn't recognize. Someone harder, colder, someone who'd been forced to see the truth about the people she loved. I walked inside and set my keys on the hall table, my movements mechanical. The house was quiet, waiting. Richard wouldn't be home for another 2 hours, his usual Thursday schedule, back from his client meetings, that I now knew were visits to our son's wife's bed. I stood in the hallway, looking at the family photos that lined the walls. Our wedding photo, young and hopeful. Marcus as a baby, as a toddler, as a teenager. Marcus and Vanessa's wedding photo, all of us smiling like we'd found heaven on earth. Every image now felt like a lie, a carefully constructed fiction that had nothing to do with reality. I went upstairs to our bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was blotchy and swollen, my eyes rimmed with red, my hair a mess from running my hands through it. I looked like someone who'd been crying for hours, which meant Richard would know the moment he saw me that something was wrong. I couldn't let that happen, not yet. I wasn't ready to confront him, wasn't ready to blow up our lives without a plan. I needed time to think, to process, to decide what came next. So I did what women have done for generations. I hid the evidence of my pain. I splashed cold water on my face until the redness faded, pressing ice cubes wrapped in a washcloth against my swollen eyes. I applied makeup carefully, covering the evidence of my breakdown with foundation and concealer and powder. I fixed my hair, changed my clothes into something normal, jeans and one of Richard's old dress shirts that I usually wore around the house. Then I went back downstairs to start dinner, because that's what I always did on Thursday evenings. Thursday was stir-fry night, had been for years. Richard liked it with extra ginger and those baby corn that came in a can. I would play the role of devoted, trusting wife one more time while I figured out how to dismantle the lives of the two people who'd so casually destroyed mine. As I chopped vegetables, the knife in my hand felt dangerous in a way it never had before. Each slice through the carrots, the peppers, the onions felt violent, cathartic. I imagined it was their lies I was cutting through, their betrayal, their comfortable certainty that I'd never find out. I made the stir-fry exactly the way Richard liked it. Set the table with our good dishes. poured wine into crystal glasses, put on soft music in the background. Everything perfect, everything normal, everything a lie. At some point, I laughed. A short, dry sound that didn't feel like mine, the kind of laugh you give when there's no other reaction left in you. I was setting the table for dinner with my cheating husband, while my son's wife was probably still carrying the smell of my husband on her skin. The absurdity of it hit me like a wave, and I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. But I didn't cry again. There were no tears left. Just a cold, hollow feeling where my heart used to be. When everything was ready, I sat in the living room with a glass of wine and waited. The clock ticked. The house settled. The wine in my glass went untouched. And I waited for my husband to come home from destroying our family, so I could smile at him across the dinner table and pretend I didn't know. At 7:30, I heard his car in the driveway. The engine cut off. The door slammed. His footsteps on the porch. The jingle of his keys. I took a deep breath and arranged my face into a smile. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The door opened and Richard walked in, loosening his tie the way he always did, his briefcase in one hand. He looked the same as he did every Thursday evening, slightly tired, ready to relax, looking forward to dinner and wine and an evening in front of the television. But I knew now where he'd really been. I knew what he'd really been doing. And the man walking through my door wasn't my husband anymore. He was a stranger wearing my husband's face. "Elena," he said, smiling at me. He crossed the room and kissed my cheek. His lips dry and familiar. His cologne, the expensive one I bought him for Christmas, mixed with something else. A lighter scent, floral and sweet. Perfume. I didn't flinch away, even though everything in me screamed to recoil from his touch. Instead, I returned his smile, my face muscles cooperating even though my heart was breaking all over again. "Smells amazing," he said, heading toward the wine cabinet like he did every Thursday. "What are we having?" "Stir fry with that ginger sauce you love," I replied, my voice steady and warm. The normalcy of the exchange felt surreal. "How was your day?" He poured 2 glasses of red wine and handed one to me, his fingers brushing mine. I noticed he'd showered recently. His hair was still slightly damp at the ends, curling a bit the way it did when he didn't blow dry it properly. Washing away the evidence, I thought. Washing away the smell of her before coming home to me. "Long," he said with an exaggerated sigh, taking a sip of his wine. "Contracts, meetings, the usual corporate nonsense. I'm exhausted." Liar. The word burned on my tongue, but I swallowed it down with a sip of wine that tasted like ash. "You work so hard," I said instead, the words automatic, rehearsed from years of saying them. "I'm glad you're home now." We sat down to eat at the dining room table, the one we'd picked out together 15 years ago, from an antique shop in Maine during a vacation. I'd fallen in love with the dark wood and the way the legs were carved with vines and flowers. Richard had haggled with the owner until we got it for half price, then hired movers to transport it home. I'd thought it was romantic, the two of us working together to bring this beautiful thing into our home. Now I wondered how many times he'd sat at this table, eating food I'd cooked, while planning his next meeting with Vanessa. I watched him across the table, really watched him for the first time in years. When had the lines around his eyes deepened? When had his hair started graying at the temples? He was 57 now, still handsome in that distinguished way that made waitresses smile a little too long and bank tellers laugh at his mediocre jokes. He'd aged well, people always said. "Good genes," he'd reply with that charming smile. But I could see it now, the vanity in the way he kept himself fit, the careful grooming, the expensive haircuts. This wasn't a man aging gracefully into his golden years with his wife. This was a man trying to stay attractive for his much younger mistress. Vanessa was 31, 26 years younger than Richard, young enough to be his daughter. The age difference had never bothered me when she was just Marcus's wife, but now it made my skin crawl. What did she see in him? Money? Power? Or did she just enjoy the thrill of the forbidden? Sleeping with her father-in-law while her husband worked long hours to build them a life. Had he always been this good at lying, or was it a skill he developed specifically for this betrayal? Elena? His voice pulled me from my thoughts. You okay? You seem distracted. I blinked and rearranged my face into a smile. Just tired. I baked today, and you know how that wears me out. What did you make? He asked, spearing a piece of chicken with his fork. A lemon lavender cake, I said, watching his face carefully for any reaction, any tell. For Vanessa, it's her and Marcus's anniversary today. Not even a flicker, not a single sign of guilt or recognition. He just nodded and said, "That's thoughtful of you. I'm sure she'll love it. Did you drop it off?" The casualness of the question made me want to scream. "No," I said calmly. "I ran out of time. I'll give it to them this weekend." Another lie to add to the pile. The cake was somewhere in the grass by the lake, destroyed and forgotten. We finished dinner, making small talk about nothing. The neighbors had started construction on an addition to their house. Had I heard the noise? There was a new restaurant downtown Richard wanted to try. Maybe next week? Marcus had mentioned to Richard that his latest project at work was going well, something about a commercial building renovation. Every word felt like acting in a play where I was the only one who knew the script had changed. Richard ate his dinner, drank his wine, smiled at my comments, asked about my day. It was a performance we'd been giving for 28 years, but now only he thought it was real. After we cleaned up, him washing, me drying. The domestic choreography we'd perfected over decades. Richard settled onto the couch with his laptop, while I excused myself to take a bath. I needed space to think, to plan, to process the rage that was building inside me, like a storm gathering strength. I ran the water as hot as I could stand it, and poured in bath salts that were supposed to be relaxing. Lavender and chamomile, the label said. I sank into the water and closed my eyes, but relaxation was impossible. My mind raced through possibilities and scenarios. Confrontation? No, not yet. I needed evidence first, proof that couldn't be denied or explained away with more lies. Divorce? Obviously. But I wanted more than just to end my marriage. I wanted them to face consequences for what they'd done to Marcus, to me, to our family. I wanted justice. I wanted revenge. I wanted them to hurt the way I was hurting. The water went cold around me before I finally got out. When I emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in my robe with my hair twisted into a towel, Richard was already in bed, scrolling through his phone with that little smile that meant he was texting someone. I caught a glimpse of his screen before he tilted it away, a message notification that he quickly dismissed, but I saw the name. Just for a second, but I saw it. Vanessa. My heart stopped. He was texting her, right here, in our bed, mere feet from where I stood. He was texting his mistress. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. "Ready for bed?" he asked, setting the phone face down on his nightstand. "In a minute," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to moisturize." I went back to the bathroom and took my time with my nighttime routine, each step deliberate and slow. Cleanser, toner, serum, moisturizer. The familiar ritual kept my hands busy while my mind spun. When I returned, Richard was asleep, or pretending to be. His breathing was even, his face peaceful. He looked like the man I'd married, the man I'd built a life with, the man I'd trusted with every vulnerable piece of myself. But that man was gone. Maybe he'd never existed at all. Maybe I'd been in love with a carefully constructed illusion for nearly 3 decades, seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was really there. I slipped into bed beside him, careful not to touch him, careful to stay on my edge of the mattress. We used to sleep tangled together, his arm around my waist, my head on his chest. But sometime over the years, we drifted to opposite sides of the bed, only touching when we were consciously making the effort. I should have seen that as a sign. I should have questioned when the easy intimacy faded, but I told myself it was normal, natural, just what happened in long marriages. I stared at the ceiling in the darkness, listening to Richard's breathing, and I thought about Vanessa, lying in her bed across town. Was she thinking about him? Was she touching herself and remembering his hands on her body? Or was she lying next to Marcus, my unsuspecting son, pretending everything was fine, just like I was pretending? The thought of Marcus sleeping next to that woman, trusting her, loving her, having no idea what she'd done, made my heart break all over again. He deserved to know. He needed to know. But how do you tell your child that his father and his wife have betrayed him in the worst possible way? Around 3 in the morning, I finally drifted into a restless sleep filled with nightmares of white wedding cakes crumbling to dust and laughter echoing through empty rooms. When I woke the next morning, Richard's side of the bed was already empty. I heard the shower running, his usual Friday morning routine. He'd be up, showered, and dressed in his expensive suits by 7, out the door by 7:30 for his commute downtown. Fridays were usually good days for us. He'd come home early, we'd order takeout, watch a movie. Our little end-of-week ritual. I wondered if that would happen today or if he had plans with Vanessa. I got up and went through my own morning routine like a zombie. Coffee, breakfast, packing Richard's lunch in the same insulated bag I'd been using for years. When he came downstairs, crisp and clean and smelling like expensive cologne, I handed him his lunch and accepted his kiss on the cheek, like I had thousands of times before. "Have a good day," I said. "You too," he replied. "Love you." The words hung in the air after he left. Love you. Did he even know what love meant? Did he say those same words to Vanessa? Or did he save different words for her? Special words that belonged only to them? The moment his car disappeared down the street, I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called my closest friend, Patricia. We'd known each other since college, long before Richard, before Marcus, before any of this. We'd been roommates in a cramped dorm room with peeling wallpaper and a mini fridge that barely worked. We'd stayed up late talking about our dreams, our fears, our future husbands and children. We'd been in each other's weddings, supported each other through difficult pregnancies and sick parents and every major life event. If anyone would understand, it would be Patricia. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice still thick with sleep. "Elena, it's 7 in the morning. Are you okay?" The concern in her voice almost broke me. I'd been holding myself together through sheer force of will, but the kindness of a true friend threatened to shatter my carefully constructed composure. "Patricia," I said, my voice cracking, despite my best efforts to stay calm, "I need to see you. Can you come over? Please?" There was a pause, then rustling as she sat up in bed. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" I can't talk about it on the phone. Please, can you just come?" "I'm on my way. Give me 20 minutes." She arrived in 15, still in her yoga pants and sweatshirt, her graying hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She stood on my doorstep with a bag of croissants from the cafe we loved, and 2 lattes, her eyes scanning my face with the kind of concern that comes from decades of friendship. She didn't say anything at first. She just pulled me into a hug that lasted long enough for me to remember I wasn't completely alone in this nightmare. Her arms were strong around me, and she smelled like the vanilla perfume she'd worn for as long as I could remember. And for a moment, I let myself be weak, let myself lean on someone else. When she finally pulled back, she searched my face. "Elena, you're scaring me. What happened?" We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd served Richard dinner while pretending everything was fine, and I told her everything. Every word I'd overheard through Vanessa's window. Every lie Richard had told. Every moment of the last 16 hours that had felt like living in someone else's skin. I told her about the cake I'd made, about seeing Richard's car, about hearing them talk about how blind and trusting I was. I told her about coming home and cooking dinner and smiling while my heart shattered into a million pieces. Patricia listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, her expression moving from shock to anger to something that looked almost like fear. Her knuckles went white as she gripped the cup harder, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. Tears for me, for Marcus, for the destruction of everything we'd built. When I finally finished, when there were no more words left to say, we sat in silence for a long moment. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a dog barked. Life went on, indifferent to our suffering. "Elena?" Patricia finally said, her voice quiet and controlled. "How long do you think this has been going on?" "I don't know," I admitted, and saying those words out loud made it worse somehow. "That's what's driving me crazy. Richard's had Thursday afternoon meetings for years. Years, Patricia. What if it's been happening since before they got married? What if they were sneaking around while Vanessa was engaged to Marcus? What if?" I couldn't finish. The possibilities were too horrifying to speak aloud. Patricia reached across the table and gripped my hand so hard it hurt. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know that either," I said. "But I can't just confront them. They'll deny it, twist it around, make me look like I'm imagining things. Richard's always been good with words, good at making people doubt themselves. I need proof. Real, undeniable proof." Patricia was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "Have you thought about hiring a private investigator?" I had, actually. I'd lain awake most of the night thinking about it. Maybe, but that feels like it'll take too long. And it's expensive. I can't pull money from our accounts without Richard noticing, and I can't exactly explain what I need it for. "I'll pay for it," Patricia said immediately. "No, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Elena, this is beyond awful. If you need help, I'm giving it. No arguments." I felt tears prick my eyes at her loyalty, her immediate willingness to help. "Thank you," I whispered. "But honestly," Patricia continued, "I think there might be a faster way. You said Richard's careless about security around the house?" I nodded. "He's never had a reason to hide things from me, or so he thought. Then we start there. His computer, his phone, his files. If this has been going on as long as you think, there has to be a trail. Emails, texts, something." The idea of going through Richard's things felt both terrifying and necessary. Technically that's illegal? Invasive? Patricia's eyes flashed. "He's been fucking your daughter-in-law, Elena. I think we're past worrying about invasion of privacy." She was right. The time for playing by the rules had ended the moment they broke every rule that mattered. Over the next 2 hours, Patricia and I mapped out a strategy. We made lists, drew diagrams, planned like we were plotting a heist. Richard was predictable. Creatures of habit usually are. Every Thursday afternoon, same time. Every Tuesday evening for his networking dinners. Sunday mornings, when he claimed to be playing golf, but never came home with grass stains or a sunburn. How many lies? How many times had I believed him without question? "You said he leaves his laptop in his study sometimes," Patricia noted, consulting the notes she'd been taking. "Does he lock it?" "Not when he's home," I said. "He's always been careless about passwords around me. He never thought I'd have a reason to look." "Then that's where we start," Patricia said firmly. "Tonight when he's asleep, I'll come back over and we'll go through everything we can find." The plan terrified me. It also felt like the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart. Having a purpose, a goal, a plan of action. It gave me something to focus on besides the pain. That day crawled by like a wounded animal. I cleaned the house even though it was already clean. I organized closets that didn't need organizing. I baked bread I didn't want. Anything to keep my hands busy, my mind occupied with something other than the images that kept flooding in unbidden. Richard and Vanessa together. His hands on her body, her lips on his. The two of them laughing at how easy it was to fool me, to fool Marcus. Did they talk about us afterward? Did they mock us for our trust, our devotion, our love? That evening, I played my role perfectly again. When Richard came home early, as he usually did on Fridays, I had lasagna waiting, his favorite. We ate together. We watched a movie, some action thing he'd been wanting to see. His arm draped across my shoulders like always. I laughed at the jokes, gasped at the explosions, leaned against him like none of it mattered. And all the while, I counted down the hours until I could start fighting back. At 11, we went to bed. I lay there in the darkness, listening to his breathing slow and deepen, counting the minutes until I was sure he was truly asleep. His breathing fell into that deep, rhythmic pattern that meant he was fully under. I waited another 20 minutes to be safe. At 12:15, I sent Patricia a text, now. She arrived 10 minutes later, parking down the street like we'd planned, slipping in through the back door I'd left unlocked. She was dressed in all black, which would have been funny under different circumstances. We looked like burglars in our own homes. Together, we moved through the dark house like ghosts, our phones providing the only light as we made our way to Richard's study. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. Every sound from outside, a car passing, a cat yowling, made us freeze. The study door creaked slightly when I pushed it open. We both froze, listening, but the house remained silent. Richard's laptop sat on his desk exactly where he'd left it, the screen dark and waiting. I opened it with trembling hands, and my heart sank when I saw the login screen. Password required. "Do you know his password?" Patricia whispered. I tried our anniversary date, March 15th, 1997. Incorrect password. I tried Marcus's birthday, September 3rd, 1998. Incorrect password. I tried my birthday, November 22nd, 1971. Incorrect password. With each failed attempt, my frustration grew. What password would Richard use? What was important enough to him that he'd— Wait, I said, a bitter thought occurring to me. With shaking fingers, I typed in Vanessa's birthday, June 7th, 1993. The laptop unlocked. Patricia and I looked at each other in the dim light, and I saw my own disgust and horror reflected in her eyes. He'd used his mistress's birthday as his password. The woman who was married to his son. The audacity of it, the carelessness, the sheer disrespect made me want to scream. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and opened his email. What we found over the next 2 hours painted a picture so much worse than I'd imagined, so much more extensive and deliberate than even my worst fears. Emails between Richard and Vanessa going back not months, but 3 years. 3 years. That meant it had started shortly after Marcus and Vanessa's first anniversary, maybe even before. I did the math with a sinking heart. Vanessa had been 28 when it started, Richard 54. The early emails were tentative, testing the waters, Richard complimenting her appearance at family dinners, Vanessa responding with playful emoji. Then the messages grew bolder, mentions of meeting for coffee, comments about keeping secrets. And then, about 6 months in, the messages turned explicit. I won't describe them. I can't. Even now, months later, the memory of those words makes me physically ill. My husband, my daughter-in-law, writing things to each other that no one should write outside of a committed relationship, let alone within the twisted triangle they'd created. There were arrangements for when and where to meet. Detailed plans to avoid being seen. Hotels I'd never heard of, always paid for in cash. Gifts purchased on credit cards I'd never seen statements for. Jewelry, clothing. Things Richard had told me were business expenses. And the messages after their meetings. God, the messages afterward. Richard telling her how beautiful she was, how she made him feel young again, how being with her was like nothing he'd experienced before. With me sitting at home, waiting for him to return, trusting him completely. Elena, Patricia breathed, pointing at the screen with a shaking finger. Look at this folder. She'd opened something marked investments. Inside were financial documents I didn't recognize. Bank statements for accounts in Richard's name that I'd never heard of. Transfer records showing money being moved. A lot of money. Where did this money come from? Patricia asked, scrolling through the statements. I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the documents. Then I saw it. The source accounts. One of them was Marcus's inheritance from Richard's parents. Money that was supposed to be held in trust for our son's future. For buying a house, or starting a business, or securing his children's education. He's been stealing from Marcus, I said, my voice flat with shock. He's been moving Marcus's money into private accounts. Patricia clicked on more files. And look, transfers to an account in Vanessa's name. Elena, he's been giving her money. Marcus's money, tens of thousands of dollars, transferred over months, systematically moved from accounts that were supposed to be untouchable. Money that belonged to Marcus, stolen by his own father and given to his wife as what? Payment? Gifts? Rewards for her deception? I felt cold all over, a numbness spreading from my chest outward until even my fingers felt frozen. This wasn't just an affair. This was theft, fraud, betrayal layered upon betrayal until I couldn't see where one crime ended and another began. We need to document all of this, Patricia said, already pulling out her phone. Every email, every transaction, every piece of evidence. We spent another hour photographing everything, downloading files onto a flash drive I'd brought from my own desk. We were methodical, careful, making sure we captured every detail while leaving no trace of our intrusion. When we finished, we had enough evidence to destroy both of them. The question was, what would I do with it? After Patricia left, slipping out into the pre-dawn darkness like a shadow, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room with a glass of wine I didn't drink, staring at the flash drives that held the truth of my husband's betrayal. The weight of what I knew felt crushing. This wasn't just about confronting Richard and Vanessa anymore. This wasn't just about ending my marriage or even protecting my broken heart. This was about protecting Marcus from people who claimed to love him while systematically destroying his future. My son deserved to know. He needed to know. But how do you tell someone that their entire life is built on lies? That their father, the man who taught him to ride a bike and helped with homework and gave him away at his wedding, is a thief? That their wife, the woman they come home to every night, the woman they're building a future with, has been betraying them from almost the beginning? Marcus was sensitive, despite his strength. He'd been a gentle child, crying when other kids were mean, bringing home injured birds to nurse back to health. As an adult, he'd channeled that sensitivity into his work, designing buildings that were beautiful and functional, spaces where people could feel safe. What would this knowledge do to him? Would it break him? Would it make him hard and cynical like I was becoming? As the sun began to rise, casting pale light through the windows, I made a decision. I couldn't tell Marcus, not yet. He'd either not believe me, thinking his mother had lost her mind, or be so devastated he'd do something rash, confront Richard violently, hurt himself, make decisions from a place of pain that he'd regret forever. No, I needed to be strategic about this. I needed to dismantle their lies piece by piece, so carefully that when the truth finally came out, there would be no room for denial, no space for them to twist the narrative or paint me as the crazy, jealous wife. I needed professional help. I needed a lawyer. At 8 o'clock that morning, after Richard had left for work with his usual kiss and false "love you," I called a law firm Patricia had recommended months ago when her cousin was going through a messy divorce. The receptionist who answered sounded young and cheerful, completely oblivious to the fact that she was scheduling an appointment that would end a 28-year marriage. Morrison and Associates. How can I help you? I'd like to make an appointment with Catherine Morrison, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. For a divorce consultation. Of course. May I ask who's referring you? Patricia Chen recommended her. Wonderful. Patricia's cousin Sarah had great results with Miss Morrison. Let me check the schedule. I have an opening this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Would that work for you? Yes, perfect. And your name? Elena Hartfield. Excellent, Mrs. Hartfield. I have you down for 2 o'clock today. The office is in the Riverside Tower downtown, 15th floor. Do you need the address? No, I know where it is. Great. Miss Morrison will need you to bring any financial documents you have access to. Bank statements, property deeds, tax returns, that sort of thing. The more information you can provide, the better she can help you. I'll bring everything. After I hung up, I sat staring at the phone in my hand. I'd actually done it. Made the appointment. Said the word divorce out loud to a stranger. There was no going back now. I spent the rest of the morning gathering documents. Our marriage certificate, property deeds for the house, tax returns from the past 7 years, bank statements for our joint accounts, insurance policies, the original prenuptial agreement we'd signed before getting married. Richard had insisted on it, claiming it was just a formality, protecting both of us. At the time, I'd signed it without really reading it, trusting that Richard had our best interests at heart. Now I wondered what I'd agreed to, what protections I'd signed away in my naivety. I put everything in a large folder, then added the flash drive with all the evidence Patricia and I had collected. My hands shook as I sealed it all up. This folder contained the end of my marriage, proof of my husband's betrayal, evidence that would tear our family apart. But it also contained my freedom. At 1:30, I changed into a conservative dress and cardigan, applied makeup, and drove downtown. Catherine Morrison's office was in one of those glass towers that reflected the sky and made everything look pristine and untouchable. The building was new, all sharp angles and expensive materials, the kind of place where important people made important decisions. I felt out of place walking through the marble lobby in my simple dress, clutching my folder like a shield. The other people in the elevator were young professionals in expensive suits, talking about deals and clients and mergers. I pressed myself into the corner and tried to be invisible. The 15th floor was quieter, more subdued. The reception area for Morrison and Associates was decorated in soothing blues and grays, with abstract art on the walls and fresh flowers on the desk. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers. The receptionist, the same cheerful voice from the phone, smiled at me. Mrs. Hartfield, Miss Morrison is ready for you. Right this way. Catherine Morrison's office was large, but not ostentatious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She stood when I entered, coming around her desk to shake my hand. She was in her late 40s, I guessed, with sharp eyes behind designer glasses and an air of competence that immediately put me at ease. Mrs. Hartfield, she said warmly, please, have a seat. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? Tea? Water would be good, I said, my throat suddenly dry. She poured water from a glass pitcher into a crystal glass and handed it to me before settling into the chair across from mine, creating a more intimate conversation space rather than the formal distance of sitting behind her desk. So, she said gently, tell me what brings you here today. And I told her everything. Again. The words were getting easier with repetition, though no less painful. I started with the Thursday afternoon, the cake, the window, the voices. I told her about the confrontation I hadn't had, the evidence I'd gathered, the theft of Marcus's money. I showed her everything, the emails, the financial records, the proof of Richard's systematic betrayal of our family. Catherine listened intently, occasionally making notes on a legal pad, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. She didn't interrupt, didn't gasp or express shock. She just listened with the professional calm of someone who'd seen it all before. When I finally finished, when I'd laid out the entire sordid story, she sat back in her chair and studied me for a long moment. "Mrs. Hartfield, may I call you Elena?" I nodded. "Elena, I want you to understand something very clearly. What your husband has done goes far beyond typical infidelity. The financial aspect, particularly the misappropriation of funds designated for your son, could have serious legal ramifications beyond just divorce proceedings." "Criminal charges?" I asked, my heart racing. "Potentially, yes, depending on how the accounts were structured and what your son decides to do with this information. Your husband could face charges of theft, fraud, possibly embezzlement if any of the money came from business accounts." The thought of Richard in handcuffs, being led away by police, should have horrified me. Instead, I felt a dark satisfaction. Good. Catherine's eyebrow raised slightly. "Before we go down that road, I need to ask you something important. What do you want out of this situation?" "I want a divorce," I said immediately. "I want to protect Marcus and make sure he gets back every penny that was stolen from him. And I want them both to face consequences for what they've done. Not just legal consequences. I want everyone to know what they did. I want their reputations destroyed the way they destroyed our family." Catherine nodded slowly. "Those are understandable goals, and they're achievable. But I need to be completely honest with you. This is going to get ugly. Very ugly. When you come after the money, especially if your son decides to press charges for theft, your husband and daughter-in-law will fight back viciously. They'll attack your credibility, your mental state, your character, anything they can use to discredit you and make themselves look like victims." "I don't care," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "They think I'm weak because I trusted them. They're about to learn how wrong they are." A small smile crossed Catherine's face. "Good. Then let's begin." Over the next several days, I lived a double life that would have been impressive if it weren't so soul-destroying. To Richard, I was still the devoted wife, cooking his meals, asking about his day, sleeping beside him at night while everything in me recoiled from his touch. I perfected the art of the performance, studying my own behaviors to make sure nothing seemed off. But during the hours he was at work, I became someone else entirely. Someone methodical, calculating, ruthless. I met with Catherine Morrison twice more to build our case. In her calm, professional way, she helped me understand the full scope of what Richard had done. The money he'd taken from Marcus wasn't just morally wrong, it was illegal. The accounts had been set up as irrevocable trusts, meaning Richard had no legal right to touch them. Every transfer he'd made was documented fraud. "We can absolutely destroy him with this," Catherine said during our second meeting, tapping the financial records with her pen. "The question is whether you want to pursue criminal charges or use it as leverage in the divorce proceedings." "What's the difference?" "Criminal charges mean police, prosecutors, potentially jail time for your husband. It also means the case becomes public record, with all the media attention that might bring. Using it as leverage means we threaten to press charges unless he agrees to a very favorable divorce settlement, giving you most of the assets, agreeing not to contest the divorce, that sort of thing." I thought about it carefully. If we threaten him but don't follow through, does that protect him? It protects him from criminal prosecution, yes. But it doesn't protect him from the divorce settlement we'll get, or from whatever your son chooses to do with the information. "Then let's start with leverage," I decided. "Get me a favorable settlement, and then I'll decide about the criminal charges." Catherine smiled. It was the smile of a predator who'd just spotted prey. "I like the way you think." While Catherine built the legal case, I focused on protecting myself financially. I opened my own bank account at a different institution, First National, 3 towns over, where no one would recognize me. I began quietly moving small amounts of money from our joint savings, protecting what I could before Richard realized what was happening. I made copies of every important document in the house: deeds, insurance policies, tax returns, investment statements. I photographed jewelry Richard had given me over the years, not because I wanted to keep it, but because I wanted to document its value for the property division. I became a spy in my own home, and I discovered I was surprisingly good at it. Every evening, while Richard watched television or worked on his laptop, I'd slip away to organize closets or sort through old photos, and instead I'd be documenting our lives, taking pictures of his expensive watch collection, photographing the contents of his safe, which I'd known the combination to for years, but had never had reason to open, making lists of every asset we owned. Richard never noticed. He was too busy texting Vanessa, too confident in his deception, too certain that his stupid, trusting wife would never suspect a thing. On the Thursday afternoon, a week after I'd first discovered the affair, I did something I'd been planning since that terrible moment at Vanessa's window. I hired a private investigator. Patricia had insisted on paying, and had finally accepted. The investigator's name was James Chen, a former police detective who now ran his own investigation firm out of a modest office across town. Catherine had recommended him with high praise, calling him the best in the business for matrimonial cases. His office was nothing like Catherine's elegant suite. It was a single room above a Chinese restaurant with Venetian blinds, mismatched furniture, and a coffee maker that looked older than I was. But James Chen himself inspired confidence immediately. He was in his 50s, I guessed, with graying hair and the kind of face that was both friendly and forgettable, perfect for his line of work. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm and his eyes were kind. "Mrs. Hartfield," he said, gesturing to a worn leather chair across from his desk. "Catherine Morrison speaks very highly of you. She says you've already done excellent preliminary work." "I did what I had to do," I said, settling into the chair. "I've reviewed the evidence you've already collected through Miss Morrison," he continued, opening a folder on his desk. "The emails, the financial records, it's extensive and damning. But if you want irrefutable proof of the affair for court proceedings, proof that can't be explained away or dismissed as circumstantial, I can provide that. Photographs, video, documented meetings, time-stamped evidence. How long will it take?" He leaned back in his chair, considering. "Given that you already know they meet on Thursday afternoons, I can have preliminary evidence within a week. Comprehensive documentation, multiple meetings, different locations, enough to establish a pattern within 2 to 3 weeks. And the cost?" He named a figure that made me wince, but Patricia had told me not to worry about money. "Do it," I said. "I want everything, every meeting, every location, every moment they think they're getting away with it. You'll have it." He pulled out a contract. "I'll need you to sign here, acknowledging that you're hiring me and that you understand the evidence will be legally obtained and admissible in court." I signed without hesitation. "One more thing," James said as I stood to leave. "This is going to be hard to look at when I bring you the results. Seeing photographic evidence of someone you love being unfaithful, it's different from knowing it intellectually. Are you prepared for that?" "I've been preparing for it every day since I found out," I said. "I'll be fine." I wasn't fine, but I would be. That Thursday, while Richard told me he had an important client meeting that might run late, James Chen followed him from his office downtown. I'd given James Richard's schedule, his car description, his usual routes. I'd made it as easy as possible. James was good at his job. He tailed Richard to a boutique hotel on the east side of town, the Riverside Inn, ironically named, given where we lived. He photographed Richard and Vanessa entering together through a side entrance, clearly trying to be discreet, but not discreet enough. He photographed them again 3 hours later when they left, her hand in his, both of them laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Vanessa wore a dress I'd never seen before, red, expensive looking, the kind of thing you wear for a lover, not a father-in-law. When James showed me the photographs 2 days later in his office, I stared at them until the images burned themselves into my memory. My husband's hand on her lower back, possessive and intimate. The way she looked up at him with an expression that should have been reserved for her actual husband. The complete absence of guilt on either face. There was one photo in particular that broke something inside me. They were standing by Richard's car, and he was kissing her goodbye. Not a quick peck, but a real kiss, deep and passionate, his hands cupping her face like she was precious to him. In 28 years of marriage, I couldn't remember the last time Richard had kissed me like that. "I'm sorry," James said quietly, watching my face. "I know this can't be easy to see." "Don't be sorry," I replied, my voice steady despite the pain. "You've given me exactly what I need." And he had. These photographs were undeniable. Richard couldn't claim it was a business meeting. Vanessa couldn't say I'd misunderstood. This was proof, concrete and irrefutable. I took the envelope of photographs and the detailed report James had prepared. Dates, times, locations, everything documented with professional precision. "Thank you," I said. "Continue surveillance for the next 2 weeks as planned. I want as much evidence as possible." Subject: if you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. And over the next 2 weeks, James documented 3 more meetings between Richard and Vanessa. Different hotels each time, different days. Once on a Tuesday evening when Richard claimed to be at a networking dinner. Once on a Sunday afternoon when he said he was playing golf. The evidence was mounting. Emails, financial records, photographs, surveillance reports. I had built an irrefutable case against them, documented their affair so thoroughly that there could be no doubt, no alternative explanation, no room for them to squirm free. The only question remaining was when and how to deploy it. That decision was made for me 2 weeks later, on an ordinary Saturday morning that would change everything. Marcus called me just after 9. His voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Mom," he said, "can you come over? I need to talk to you about something." My heart stuttered. Had he found out? Had Vanessa confessed? "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything okay? Just, please come. Now, if you can. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I drove to Marcus and Vanessa's townhouse with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Was I about to walk into a confrontation I hadn't prepared for? Did Marcus know about his father? Was Vanessa there? When Marcus opened the door, I could see immediately that something was terribly wrong. His eyes were red and swollen, his hair disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. He was still in his pajamas at 9 in the morning, and there was an empty bottle of whiskey on the table behind him. "Marcus, what's happened?" I asked, stepping inside. The townhouse was a mess. Throw pillows on the floor, a lamp knocked over, what looked like a hole punched in the wall. Signs of rage, of violence, of complete loss of control. "It's Vanessa," he said, his voice breaking on her name. "I think she's having an affair." Time seemed to stop. The words hung in the air between us. And I realized this was it. A moment I'd been both dreading and waiting for. What? He moved into the living room like a man walking through quicksand and collapsed onto the couch. I found text messages on her phone. Last night, she was in the shower and her phone was on the nightstand and it kept buzzing. I picked it up to see if it was important and he trailed off, putting his head in his hands. I sat down beside him, my mind racing. "She's been deleting them," he continued, his voice muffled. "But her cloud backup. I accessed her cloud backup, Mom. There are messages going back years. Messages about meeting someone. Intimate things. planning when they could be alone together. Did the messages say who? I asked carefully, even though I already knew the answer. No names. She was careful about that. Just, I miss you and can't wait to see you, and he made a choking sound. God, Mom, I feel like such an idiot. How did I not see this? How long has she been lying to me? I pulled my son into my arms as he broke down, his body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of him. My own heart was breaking for him, even as part of me was relieved that the secret was finally beginning to surface. I held him and let him cry, stroking his hair like I had when he was small and had scraped his knee or been hurt by cruel words on the playground. But this hurt was so much bigger, so much more devastating than anything I could kiss away or fix with a band-aid and kind words. You're not an idiot, I said softly when his sobs finally subsided into shaky breathing. You trusted your wife. That's not a weakness, Marcus. It's who you are. It's who you are, he asked, pulling back to look at me with devastated eyes. Do I confront her? Do I leave? I can't think straight. When I saw those messages, I lost it. I punched the wall, threw things. She's at her mother's right now. She left last night, after I confronted her about acting distant. I didn't tell her I knew, I just said she seemed like something was wrong. And she left, just packed a bag and left. It didn't know this part. He still didn't know the worst of it. I took a deep breath, and knowing that what I said next would change everything forever. Marcus, I need to tell you something, and it's going to hurt worse than anything you've ever felt. But you deserve the truth. His eyes widened with fear. Mom, what? I know who Vanessa's having an affair with, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I've known for weeks. The color drained from his face. Who? I couldn't say it. The words stuck in my throat like broken glass. But I didn't have to. I watched as Marcus looked at me, really looked at me, and understanding began to dawn. I saw the exact moment he made the connection. Saw his face go from confusion to disbelief to horrified comprehension. No, he said, standing up abruptly. No, Mom, it's not Dad. Tell me it's not Dad. Please tell me it's not him. The silence was my answer. Marcus made a sound like a wounded animal, a raw cry of pain that seemed torn from his very soul. He grabbed a glass from the coffee table and threw it against the wall, where it shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. Then he sank to his knees, his hands covering his face, his entire body convulsing with rage and grief. I knelt beside him, trying to put my arms around him, but he pushed me away. Don't, he gasped. Just don't. So I sat there on the floor beside him, not touching, just present, while my son fell apart. He cried. He raged. He punched the floor until his knuckles bled. He said things I'd never heard him say, cursed words I didn't know he knew, made promises of violence that scared me. When he finally exhausted himself, when there were no more tears or rage left in him, he looked at me with empty eyes. How long have you known? He asked. 3 weeks, I admitted. I found out by accident. I went to drop off a cake at their house, and I saw your father's car there. I heard them through the window. 3 weeks. He laughed bitterly. You've known for 3 weeks and you didn't tell me? I wanted to protect you, I said. I wanted to gather evidence first, to make sure you wouldn't be blindsided without having some kind of foundation to stand on. Evidence? He looked at me sharply. What evidence? I told him. About the emails I'd found on Richard's laptop, about the financial records showing money being moved from Marcus's trust accounts, about the private investigator, the photographs, the documented meetings. With each revelation, I watched Marcus's expression harden. The grief was still there, but it was being overtaken by something colder, sharper. Determination. He stole from me, Marcus said flatly when I told him about the money. My own father stole money that was supposed to be mine and gave it to her. to his... He couldn't finish the sentence. Yes, I said simply. Tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more. We're still tracing all the transfers. Marcus stood up slowly, mechanically. He walked to the window and stared out at the street, his back to me. What are you going to do? I'm filing for divorce, I said. I've already met with a lawyer. The papers will be ready next week. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, without turning around, he said, I want them destroyed. Both of them. I want everyone to know what they did. They will be, I promised. I've been planning this, Marcus. Trust me, they will answer for what they've done. He turned to face me, and I saw my own determination reflected in his eyes. My gentle son, who'd cried over injured birds, who'd never been in a fight, who'd chosen a career in creating beautiful things, that boy was gone. In his place was a man who'd been betrayed by the two people who should have protected him most. I want to help, he said. Tell me what to do. Over the next hours, Marcus and I made a plan. He would confront Vanessa, but say nothing about knowing her partner was Richard. We needed her to confess willingly, to give us something we could use beyond what we already had. Meanwhile, I would continue gathering evidence, preparing for the legal battles to come. When? Marcus asked. When do we blow this whole thing up? I thought about it carefully. A divorce papers would be ready in a week. The evidence was comprehensive. We had everything we needed. Soon, I said. But we need to be smart. They can't know we're coming. They need to feel safe right up until the moment we destroy them. Marcus nodded, his jaw set in a way that reminded me of myself. We were no longer victims waiting to be saved. We were survivors preparing for war. That night, I went home to Richard and played my role one final time. I cooked dinner, his favorite pot roast with those little red potatoes he liked. We watched television together, his arm draped across my shoulders like always. I laughed at his jokes, asked about his day, smiled when he kissed me goodnight. But inside, I was counting down to the moment when I would finally stop pretending, stop protecting him, stop being the good wife who turned blind eyes to betrayal. The end was coming, and I couldn't wait to watch their world burn. The confrontation happened on a Saturday morning, exactly 3 weeks after I'd first discovered the affair. Marcus had spent those weeks playing the unknowing husband while quietly documenting everything: Vanessa's late nights, her unexplained absences, the way she'd check her phone constantly and smile at messages she wouldn't share. He called me the night before. Tomorrow, he said simply. I'm done waiting. I can't keep pretending. I'd prepared for this moment as best I could, but nothing could actually prepare you for the destruction of a family. I drove to their townhouse early, parking down the street where I could see their front door, but not be immediately visible. Marcus had asked me to be there, to be his support when everything fell apart. Through the kitchen window, I watched as Marcus confronted Vanessa. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see everything. The shock on her face, the way she went pale, the way she tried to reach for him, and he stepped back like her touch burned. She was crying, shaking her head frantically, her hands gesturing as she tried to explain. But Marcus was ice. I'd never seen my son so cold, so utterly closed off. He pulled out his phone, showed her something, the evidence, probably the messages he'd found, and I watched her crumble. She grabbed his arm, and he yanked it away, his face twisted with disgust and pain. Then he said something that made her freeze, her mouth falling open in horror. Who is he? I didn't need to hear it to know what he'd asked. Vanessa's mouth moved. Once, twice. She was denying it, I could tell, shaking her head, backing away. But Marcus showed her something else on his phone. What I didn't know, and whatever it was broke her completely. She sagged against the kitchen counter, her hand over her mouth, and then she spoke. One word, probably. One name that destroyed everything. Marcus's entire body went rigid. He stood there for a long moment, absolutely still, and then he punched the wall so hard I heard the impact from outside, even through the closed window. Plaster dust rained down. His hand came away bloody. Vanessa screamed, reaching for him, but he pushed past her and stormed toward the door. I got out of my car to meet him in the driveway. He walked straight to me, his face a mask of rage and pain, his right hand already swelling. "She admitted it," he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "She actually admitted it. 3 years, Mom. 3 fucking years with my own father." I pulled him into my arms, this broken man who used to be my little boy. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry." "I want them destroyed," he said into my shoulder, his voice muffled. "Both of them. I want everyone to know what they did. I want them to lose everything." "They will be," I promised. "Trust me, they will be." We didn't have long to wait for Richard to discover that everything had imploded. Vanessa called him in a panic. I could hear her hysterical voice through the phone even from where I stood. Within an hour, Richard's car came screeching into the townhouse driveway, tires squealing. Marcus and I had moved inside by then, away from the neighbors' curious eyes. We watched through the window as Richard burst out of his car and ran into the house. Through the window, we could see him grab Vanessa's shoulders, see her collapse against him crying, see him pull out his phone with shaking hands. He was calling me. My phone rang, Richard's name flashing on the screen. Marcus and I looked at each other. "Answer it," he said. "See what he says." I answered. "Hello? Elena, we need to talk." Richard's voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. "I'm coming home. We need to talk right now. Let's end this." We drove back to my house. Our house, I corrected myself. It had been my house long before Richard had poisoned it with his presence. We went inside and waited. He looked around frantically and found Marcus and me standing together in the living room, united front. "Elena, what the hell did you tell him?" he demanded, pointing at Marcus. I stood up slowly, calmly. I told him the truth. The truth you were too coward to confess yourself. You had no right. I had every right. My voice rose, despite my intention to stay calm. You destroyed this family. You betrayed your son, your wife, everything you claim to hold sacred. "It's not what you think," Richard started, the classic line of every cheater ever caught. "If you just let me explain." "Explain what?" Marcus cut in, his voice deadly quiet. "Explain how you've been fucking my wife for 3 years? Explain how you stole money from my trust fund to buy her gifts? Explain how you made a fool of me in my own marriage?" Richard's face went white. "Marcus, I never meant for you to find out like this. I never meant to hurt you." "But you didn't mind hurting him as long as he didn't know about it?" I interrupted. "Is that what you're saying?" Richard turned to me, desperation replacing arrogance. "Elena, please, let me explain. This thing with Vanessa, it just happened. It wasn't planned. We never meant." "Don't," I said, cutting him off. "Don't you dare stand in my house and tell me it just happened. You made a choice. Every Thursday afternoon for 3 years. You made a choice. Every time you lied to me about client meetings, every time you stole from your son, every time you touched her. You made a choice." "I have the emails, Richard," I continued, my voice cold. "I have the bank statements, the photographs, the hotel receipts. I have everything." All the color drained from his face. "You went through my things?" The hypocrisy was stunning. "You slept with our son's wife," I screamed, finally losing the control I'd maintained for weeks. "You stole from him. You lied to me every single day for 3 years. And you're angry about privacy?" Marcus stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "I want the money, every penny you took from my accounts. And then I never want to see you again." Richard looked at his son, and for the first time, I saw something like genuine fear in his eyes. "Marcus, please, let me explain. We can fix this. We can go to family therapy, work through it. I'm your father." "You stopped being my father the first time you touched my wife," Marcus said flatly. You're nothing to me now. Less than nothing. Richard turned to me, his expression shifting to something like panic. Elena, please, don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it. Don't throw away 30 years. You already threw it away, I interrupted. The divorce papers will be served next week. My lawyer has all the evidence. And if you contest anything at all, I'll make sure every piece of documentation I have becomes public record. The threat landed. Richard knew what that meant. His reputation, his career, his standing in the community, everything he'd built would be destroyed if people knew what he'd done. You can't do this, he said. But there was no conviction in his voice anymore. Just fear. Watch me. Richard stood there for a long moment, looking between Marcus and me. Perhaps finally realizing that there was no talking his way out of this, no charm offensive that would save him. Then he did something I never expected. He started to cry. Not dignified tears, but ugly, gasping sobs. His face crumpled and he sank onto the couch, covering his face with his hands. I'm sorry, he gasped. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know why Please don't do this. I'll do anything. I'll end things with Vanessa right now. I'll get help. I'll make it up to you both. Please. I felt nothing. Not pity, not satisfaction, just a cold emptiness. This man crying on my couch was a stranger. The Richard I'd married would never have betrayed his family like this. Or maybe he would have, and I'd just never seen it. It's too late for sorry, I said quietly. You need to leave, now. This is my house too, he said, looking up with red eyes. Actually, I said, pulling a document from my purse. According to the deed, which I checked very carefully, this house is in my name only. My parents gave us the down payment as a wedding gift to me specifically, and I made sure my name was the only one on the title. So no, Richard, this is my house and I want you out. He stared at me like he'd never seen me before. When did you become so cold? When I realized I'd spent 28 years loving a man who never existed. Marcus walked to the door and opened it. Get out, Dad, or I'll throw you out. Richard stood slowly, his movements those of an old man. He looked at Marcus with pleading eyes. Son, don't call me that. You lost that right. Richard flinched like he'd been slapped. Then he walked to the door, pausing beside me. I never wanted to hurt you, he said softly. But you did, I replied. And now you get to live with that. He left, just walked out the door, and got into his car and drove away. Marcus and I stood in the doorway, watching until the car disappeared, and then we went back inside and collapsed onto the couch together, exhausted. Is it really over? Marcus asked quietly. The confrontation is, I said, but the fallout is just beginning. I was right. The next weeks were a blur of legal proceedings, angry phone calls, and the complete destruction of the lives we'd known. Richard moved out to a hotel initially, then to a rented apartment in a less nice part of town. He took only what I allowed him to take, which wasn't much. Vanessa and Marcus's divorce proceedings began simultaneously with Marcus refusing to speak to her, except through lawyers. The two people who'd betrayed us both were left to deal with the consequences of their choices, and those consequences were severe. Catherine Morrison was as good as her reputation suggested. Within days of serving the divorce papers, she had Richard on the defensive. The evidence we'd gathered, the emails, the financial records, the photographs, painted a picture of systematic fraud and betrayal that was impossible to deny. Richard tried at first to claim the emails were faked, but when Catherine pointed out that they were pulled directly from his own cloud backup, with authenticated timestamps, he had nothing to say. He tried to claim the money transfers were legitimate business expenses, but the bank records showed they went directly to Vanessa's personal account, not to any business entity. He was trapped, and he knew it. But the most satisfying moment came when Marcus decided to press charges for the stolen money. He'd consulted with his own lawyer, a shark of a woman named Teresa Rodriguez, who specialized in financial crimes. After reviewing all the evidence, she'd told Marcus he had an airtight case for theft and fraud. "Your father violated the terms of an irrevocable trust," Teresa explained during a meeting the three of us had, Marcus, me, and her. "That's not just a civil matter. That's criminal, and the amount he took crosses the threshold for felony charges." Marcus had looked at me, and I'd seen the question in his eyes. Was he really going to do this? Send his own father to face criminal prosecution? "Do it," I'd said quietly. "He needs to face real consequences." So Marcus filed a police report, and then things moved very quickly. The police investigated. Richard's theft wasn't just morally wrong, it was documented, provable fraud. The DA's office got involved. Within weeks, Richard was facing criminal charges that could result in years in prison. His career imploded overnight. The company he'd worked for since before Marcus was born asked for his resignation, not wanting to be associated with someone facing criminal charges. His business partners distanced themselves, removing his name from projects and dissolving their partnerships. The professional organizations he belonged to quietly dropped him from their membership rolls. His friends, the couples we'd socialized with for decades, stopped calling. Their loyalty, it turned out, had been to the idea of Richard and Elena as the perfect couple. Once that illusion shattered, they wanted nothing to do with either of us, but especially not Richard. He became a pariah overnight. Vanessa fared no better. Marcus's lawyer ensured she left the marriage with nothing. The prenup she'd signed, without reading carefully, because she'd trusted Marcus and loved him, or so she'd claimed, became her undoing. It specified that in cases of proven infidelity, the unfaithful spouse forfeited all claims to marital assets. She walked away from 4 years of marriage with nothing but her personal belongings and the car she'd brought into the marriage. Her job at the marketing firm where she'd worked was next to go. Someone, I never found out who, had leaked the details of the affair to her coworkers. The story spread like wildfire. Vanessa had been sleeping with her father-in-law, destroying her marriage and his in the process. The firm's HR department, facing complaints from employees who felt uncomfortable working with her, suggested she seek employment elsewhere. She moved back in with her parents in a suburb 2 hours away. I heard through the grapevine, Patricia, who had a friend who knew Vanessa's mother, that her parents were humiliated by what she'd done. Her mother wouldn't speak to her. Her father had told neighbors they didn't have a daughter anymore. I should have felt triumphant. I'd gotten everything I wanted. Divorce, justice, the destruction of the people who'd hurt me and Marcus. But as I stood in my empty house one evening a few months after everything had imploded, boxing up the last of Richard's belongings to donate to charity, I realized I felt nothing but exhaustion. The affair hadn't just destroyed my marriage. It had fundamentally changed who I was. I was harder now, more suspicious, less willing to trust. I looked at happy couples and wondered what secrets they were hiding. I heard women talk about their wonderful husbands and thought, "Are you sure?" Patricia told me that would fade with time, that I'd learn to open my heart again, and not everyone was like Richard. But I wasn't sure I believed her. How do you recover from discovering that the person you trusted most in the world had been lying to you for years? Marcus was struggling too. The betrayal had hit him even harder than it had hit me, if that was possible. His father and his wife, the two people who should have been his biggest supporters, had been destroying him behind his back. How do you recover from that? He threw himself into work, putting in 16-hour days at the architecture firm. He avoided talking about Richard or Vanessa, changing the subject whenever their names came up. He went to therapy. I knew because he'd mentioned it once, briefly, before making me promise not to ask about it. He'd call me every few days to check in, but our conversations were surface level, carefully avoiding the wound but still bled beneath everything we said. We talked about his work projects, about the weather, about anything except the elephant in the room. I missed my son, not just his physical presence, but his openness, his warmth, the easy relationship we'd had before all of this. That relationship was damaged now, maybe permanently. Not by anything I'd done wrong, but by the association I reminded him of the betrayal every time he looked at me. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I made a decision. I couldn't stay in Riverside Heights anymore. The house, the neighborhood, the memories, all of it felt like a tomb I was trapped inside. Everywhere I looked, I saw ghosts of the life I'd thought I had. I put the house on the market. It sold within 2 weeks. Apparently, a large colonial in a good neighborhood was highly desirable, even if it came with the stain of scandal. I didn't care what people thought anymore. I used the money from the sale to buy a small cottage in a coastal town called Harborview, 3 hours north. The town was small, less than 5,000 year-round residents, and quiet. Nobody there knew my story. Nobody looked at me with pity or curiosity or judgment. I was just Elena, the woman who'd moved into the blue cottage on Ocean Street. The cottage itself was small but charming, with weathered shingles and white trim, and a front porch that looked out over the water. It needed work. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged slightly, the garden was overgrown, but that was perfect. I needed projects, things to pour my efforts into, needed things to focus on, besides the wreckage of my old life. I spent my first weeks in Harborview stripping wallpaper and painting walls and pulling weeds. Physical labor that left me exhausted, enough to sleep without nightmares. The ocean became my constant companion, its rhythm soothing in a way nothing else was. Every morning, I'd walk along the beach, listening to the waves. Feeling the salt air clear away some of the pain. I'd watch the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, and think about how the world kept turning, indifferent to human suffering. Somehow, that was comforting. 9. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since before I married Richard. I set up an easel in the sunroom and painted what I saw, seascapes mostly, waves and sky and the occasional seabird. The paintings weren't very good, but that wasn't the point. The point was creating something, putting beauty into the world instead of just witnessing its destruction. I joined a book club at the local library, full of women who became friends without asking intrusive questions about my past. We met every other Wednesday to discuss books and drink wine and gossip about town events. It was normal, blessedly normal, and I soaked it up like someone dying of thirst. Slowly, painfully, I began to heal. One afternoon, about a year after I'd moved to Harborview, I was walking on the beach when my phone rang. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. We talked regularly now, more than we had in those first awful months, but he rarely called during the workday. "Marcus, everything okay?" "Yeah, Mom, I'm good. Actually, I wanted to tell you something. Can you talk?" "Of course." I sat down on a piece of driftwood, my heart racing. His tone was different, lighter than I'd heard in months. "I'm seeing someone," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Her name is Sophie. She's a teacher at the elementary school near my office. We met at a coffee shop about 3 months ago, and we've been dating since then." Relief and joy flooded through me. "Marcus, that's wonderful. Tell me about her." He did, his words tumbling over each other in his enthusiasm. Sophie was 34, taught 3rd grade, loved hiking and old movies. She was kind, Marcus said, and patient, and when he told her about everything that had happened with Richard and Vanessa, she hadn't run away screaming. "She knows everything," Marcus continued. "What Dad did, what Vanessa did, all of it. And she didn't judge me for it or treat me like I was damaged goods. She listened, she understood, and she didn't run." "She sounds amazing," I said, tears streaming down my face. "She is. Mom, I want you to meet her, when you're ready. No pressure, but I think you really like her." "I'd love to meet her," I said immediately. "Whenever you want." We made plans for Sophie and Marcus to visit Harborview the following weekend. After we hung up, I sat on that piece of driftwood for a long time, watching the waves and crying. Not sad tears this time, but something else. Relief, maybe. Hope. My son was healing. Slowly. carefully. He was rebuilding his life, and if he could do it, maybe I could too. Sophie and Marcus arrived on a bright Saturday morning. I watched from my porch as they pulled up, and I saw immediately that Marcus looked different. Lighter. He was smiling, really smiling, in a way I hadn't seen since before the betrayal. Sophie was lovely, petite, with curly red hair and a warm smile that reached her eyes. She hugged me like we were old friends, not strangers meeting for the first time. "Mrs. Hartild, it's so good to finally meet you. Marcus talks about you all the time. Please, call me Elena. And it's wonderful to meet you too." We spent the day together, walking on the beach, having lunch at the little cafe in town, talking and laughing. Sophie was easy to be around, with none of the awkwardness that sometimes comes with meeting a boyfriend's mother for the first time. She asked me about my paintings, about Harborview, about my life there, and she listened with genuine interest. Later, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, Marcus reached for Sophie's hand and she took it naturally, comfortably. I watched them together and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, happiness for someone else. That evening, after they'd left to drive back to the city, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat alone on my porch. The ocean was calm, the sky fading from orange to purple to deep blue. Somewhere out there, Richard was living alone in his apartment, his health failing, his life in ruins. Vanessa was in her parents' house, working some job she hated, alone and unwelcome. I thought I'd feel satisfaction knowing that. Instead, I just felt done. Done with anger, done with hurt, done letting their choices define my life. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Patricia came to visit a few weeks later, bringing her infectious laughter and her refusal to let me wallow. We spent a long weekend together, drinking wine and cooking elaborate meals and talking about everything and nothing. "You look different," she said, on her last night there, as we sat on the beach, watching the stars come out. "Happier." "I'm getting there," I admitted. "Some days are better than others, but yeah, I think I'm getting there." "I'm proud of you," Patricia said quietly. "What you went through, what they did to you. I don't know if I'd have been as strong. I didn't have a choice. It was be strong or let them destroy me completely. There's always a choice." Patricia said, "You chose to fight back. You chose to survive. You chose to rebuild. Those were all choices, Elena, and you made the right ones." Her words stayed with me long after she'd left. Over the next months and years, life continued its slow march forward. Marcus and Sophie got engaged, then married in a small ceremony on the beach near my cottage. I cried happy tears watching my son commit himself to someone who truly loved him, someone who would never betray him the way Vanessa had. I started volunteering at the local women's shelter, helping women who were leaving abusive relationships start over. My own experience, while different, had given me insight into the difficulty of leaving a life behind and building a new one. I could help them navigate the practical aspects, opening bank accounts, finding lawyers, documenting abuse. But more than that, I could give them hope. If I could survive what I'd been through and find happiness again, they could too. I heard about Richard occasionally, through Marcus, who heard things through the legal proceedings that dragged on for years. Richard's health had declined rapidly after the scandal. The stress, probably, combined with the collapse of everything he'd valued. He'd had a heart attack, Marcus told me, a bad one that left him weakened and struggling. He'd served 18 months in prison for the financial fraud, but he'd been released early due to health concerns. He lived alone in a small apartment, his money mostly gone to legal fees and restitution, his friends and family having abandoned him. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel vindicated either. I just felt nothing. He was a stranger who'd once played the role of my husband, and now he was gone from my life completely. That was how it should be. Vanessa had disappeared completely. Last anyone heard, she'd moved across the country, changed her name, was working some administrative job somewhere. She'd tried to contact Marcus once, a long email full of apologies and explanations and requests for forgiveness. Marcus had deleted it without finishing it. He'd moved on, and she wasn't part of his future. 5 years after I discovered the affair, I stood on my porch one morning and realized something profound. I was happy. Not the naive happiness of someone who'd never been hurt, but the deep, resilient happiness of someone who'd survived the worst and come out the other side. I had my little cottage with its bright blue paint and its garden full of flowers. I had my morning walks on the beach and my painting and my volunteer work. I had friends who knew me as Elena, not as Richard's ex-wife or the woman who'd been betrayed. I had Marcus, healed and healthy and building a beautiful life with Sophie. They just told me they were expecting their first child, my grandchild, and I'd cried happy tears for an hour. I had myself back, stronger and wiser, and no longer willing to make myself small to fit someone else's comfort. That morning, as I walked along the beach with my coffee, I thought about the woman I'd been 5 years ago. The one who'd baked a cake and gone to her daughter-in-law's house out of kindness. The one who'd believed in happy families and forever love and the fundamental goodness of the people she loved. I pitied her a little, that naive woman, but I loved her too. She'd had to exist, had to experience that betrayal, so that I could become this version of myself. Harder, yes, but also more authentic, more honest, more alive. The waves rolled in and out, eternal and unchanging. I thought about Richard and Vanessa, about how they thought they were so clever, so careful, so safe in their deception. They'd underestimated me completely. They'd thought my trust made me weak, my love made me blind, my kindness made me complicit in my own destruction. They'd been wrong about everything. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. It was the wedding ring Richard had given me 30 years ago. The one I'd worn every day until the day I'd filed for divorce. I'd kept it in a drawer for years, not sure what to do with it. Selling it felt wrong. Keeping it felt worse. But standing there on the beach with the sun rising over the water, I knew exactly what to do with it. I drew back my arm and threw it as hard as I could into the ocean. It disappeared instantly, swallowed by the waves, gone forever. And with it went the last piece of the woman I used to be. I stood there for a long time, watching the ocean, feeling lighter than I had in years. When I finally turned to walk back to my cottage, I noticed an older woman had been watching me from further down the beach. She walked over, smiling gently. "That looked cathartic," she said. "It was," I replied. "Good for you. Too many of us hold on to things that weigh us down." She extended her hand. "I'm Margaret. I live just up the road. I've seen you walking here in the mornings, but we've never properly introduced ourselves." We talked for a few minutes, and she invited me to join her book club, different from the one I already attended. She assured me, with a laugh. This one met on Sunday mornings and focused on biographies of remarkable women. "I think you'd fit right in," Margaret said, with a knowing look that suggested she'd heard some version of my story, even if she didn't know the details. "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. As I walked back to my cottage that morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Excitement for the future. Not anxiety about what might go wrong, but genuine curiosity about what might go right. Richard and Vanessa had tried to destroy me. Instead, they'd freed me from a life that was too small, too limiting, too built on lies and pretense. I was Elena Hartfield, 56 years old, divorced, grandmother-to-be. I was a woman who'd been broken and had put herself back together into something new, something stronger, something that couldn't be shattered by lies. I thought about all the women out there listening to my story, women who might be going through their own betrayals, their own nightmares. I wanted them to know something important. You will survive this. You're stronger than you think. You're braver than you feel. And when this is over, when you're standing on your own metaphorical beach, watching your own sunrise, you'll understand what I learned. The greatest victory isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's rebuilding yourself into someone they could never touch again. I went inside my cottage, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and sat at my easel. I had a new painting I wanted to start, a sunrise over the ocean, full of light and color and hope. As I mixed my paints, I thought about how far I'd come, from the woman who discovered the affair, to the woman who'd gathered evidence, to the woman who'd fought back, to the woman who'd won, to the woman who'd rebuilt her entire life from the ground up. It had been the hardest journey of my life. But standing here now, in my little cottage by the sea, painting sunrises and making new friends, and waiting for my grandchild to be born, I wouldn't trade it for anything. Richard and Vanessa were gone now, not just from my life, but from my thoughts. Two ghosts swallowed by the choices they'd made, living out the consequences of their betrayal far away from me. And I was here, free, whole, finally, completely, myself. The sun rose higher, spilling golden light through my windows. I smiled and added a touch of brilliant orange to my canvas, capturing the exact shade of hope. This was my story, my truth, my survival, and it wasn't over. It was just beginning. Thank you for listening. Thank you for witnessing my journey. And wherever you are in this world, whatever city you're calling home, know that you're not alone. We survive, we rebuild, we rise, and they never see us coming.